Hello, my name is Frederick Velez III Burgos, and I am the National Director of Civic Engagement for Hispanic Federation. I'm very happy to welcome you to the Redistricting Academy presented by Hispanic Federation. We will be talking today about a lot of topics, but our main objective will be to learn about what is redistricting, how it's tied to the census, what's the reapportionment process, and basically how the reapportionment results and the federal redistricting guidelines shape the redistricting process. But most importantly, we're going to learn what you can do to get involved because that's important. So let's start off. So, what is redistricting? So, redistricting is the process of creating new congressional districts or redrawing existing districts. And the important thing about this is that it only happens every 10 years. And it also doesn't happen in a vacuum. So when we talk about redistricting, there's actually two steps that are just as important as the redistricting process that happen before redistricting can even start. And one of them is the census. So let's talk a little bit about the census and redistricting. So the census is actually one of the oldest processes in the United States. And it counts every resident living in the country since 1790. And it's actually the US Constitution who requires that the population be counted every 10 years. After last year's 2020 census, it was determined that the total US population was 334 million people that lived all across the US. Those numbers that are captured by the US Census are used to determine the number of seats that each state will have in the US House of Representatives for the next 10 years. So that's very important to know that those numbers that the census gets, that data that they get, they use it to determine the size of the congressional delegation of each state. So now let's go over to the second step. So the first one was the census. The second one is reapportionment. So what is reapportionment? So it's the process of dividing the 430 seats in the House of Representatives among the 50 states. The process and the formula that is used for this process is actually established by the US Constitution and federal law. So just think about a cake that you have to divide into 400, that you have 435 pieces of a cake that you have to divide into 50 states. So that's really what reapportionment is. But what does the process look like? So first of all, some of the things that we need to take into consideration when talking about the reapportionment process is that the Constitution requires that each state have at least one seat in the House of Representatives, no matter their population. So if a state had 50,000 people, they would still have one representative at least in the House of Representatives. And then all the other seats, so basically after that, each state has a seat number 1 through 50. So seats number 51 to 435, those are the ones that are divided. And they are divided based on the state population. Other things that we need to take into consideration when thinking about the process is that for a long, long time, as states get added into our nation, the number of seats in the House of Representatives kept growing. But in 1929, Congress passed a law that set that number of seats to 435. So after 1920, even though we gained more states, the number of seats in the House stayed at 435. And then in 1941, Congress also passed a law that determined the timeline of the reapportionment process and also the formula for the number of seats per state. So what happened before it is that Congress would pass laws every 10 years or before every redistricting process to guide that specific redistricting cycle. But in 1941, they established a process that's being used until now. The other thing to take into consideration is that the populations of Washington, D.C., and the U.S. territories like Puerto Rico, American Samoa, or the U.S. Virgin Islands are not considered when determining the amount that each representative, that each state receives. Now, let's talk about what the timeline for both the census and apportionment looks like. So, on the left hand side, you're going to see what is happening now post COVID. And on the right hand side, you're going to see the timeline that was supposed to happen. But unfortunately, COVID is one of the reasons that we're not there. COVID actually interrupted the census operations in a way that, as you can see on the left-hand side, had a domino effect that delayed all of the other processes for reapportionment. So while by April 1 of 2021, the Census Bureau was supposed to provide the population data to all states, that didn't happen until August 12. And the same thing, if you can see, by January of this year, the data of apportionment and the state delegation size was supposed to be delivered to the clerk of the House, but that didn't happen until April. So again, that has actually created a domino effect that has compressed the time that state legislatures will have to do the redistricting process. And that is one of the reasons why it's so important for us to get involved. Now, we've been talking a little bit about the reapportionment process, kind of like what it is, but here are some of the results of what actually happened after the reapportionment process this year. So the first thing is that, as I mentioned, the population used to determine how many representatives each state will have is different than the total population of the US because we don't take into consideration the population of US territories and Washington, D.C. That's why you see that even though the population of the US is almost 335 million. The population that's used to determine the amount of states, of congressional seats per state, is actually 331 million. Um, Other things that came out of the reapportionment process is that the average congressional district population will be 761,000 people, but we're going to talk a little bit about this because this will vary by state. Additionally, 7 states lost a congressional seat, 6 states gained a congressional seat. And also on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see the 6 states that only have one US representative, and those are Alaska, Wyoming, Delaware, South Dakota, Vermont, and North Dakota. So as you can see here, I mentioned that there are 7 states that lost seats, and those are Ohio, New York, Illinois, California, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Michigan. All of these states lost one seat. And then here are the states that gained those seats. As you can see, Florida, Oregon, Montana, North Carolina, and Colorado all gained one seat, while the state of Texas gained 2 seats on this cycle. So I mentioned that the redistricting process doesn't happen in a vacuum. We first had the census, then we had the reapportionment process, and now we're finally at the redistricting process. So let's talk a little bit more about this because this is why we're here, right? So, as I mentioned, the redistricting process doesn't happen in a vacuum. So, but we need to learn some of the other things that are going on when it comes to redistricting. So the first thing that we need to learn is that just like electoral rules and laws and regulations, the redistricting process is almost completely controlled by the state. That's very important. Also, very important to know is that while states control most of the redistricting process, they still have to follow some federal standards and guidelines. Most of these guidelines have actually been set by judicial decisions when different groups or citizens or even the state sued different entities because they thought that the congressional districts were unconstitutional. And that has led to some federal jurisprudence when it comes to redistricting guidelines. And we're going to talk a little bit about them. The first one is the one person, one vote rule. And what that basically says is that all congressional districts within a state should have the same population size. So let's use the state of Montana as an example. Montana has 2 congressional seats. So if we were to look at their population and let's say that it's 1.2 million, you're supposed to have 600,000 people per congressional district. Again, you want congressional district in the state that have the same population size. What we can't do is that we have in Montana one district that's, for example, 1 million people and the other 200,000 people, because one representative is going to be representing way more people than the other. So that's what the one person, one vote guideline means. We also have Section 2 of the Voter Rights Act, which says that congressional districts that dilute minority voting strength cannot be drawn. And I know that I said like a lot of academic words in just one sentence, but what it basically means is that districts that reduce the power acquired by minorities or the power of representation by minorities, be Latino, Black, Asian, or even language groups, those cannot be drawn if they reduce the representation power. And we're going to see some examples later on of how that happens. Another important thing is that in previous redistricting cycles, the Department of Justice had plea clearance authority. And what that again basically means is that the Department of Justice, the federal Department of Justice, had the power to tell a state that those district maps were not approved because they, in some way or other, were being unconstitutional. Another thing to take into consideration is that the US codes determine that they're only single member districts. So basically, only one representative can represent one district. So now that we reviewed some of the federal guidelines, let's also talk about some of the fair redistricting principles that we have. Now, one caveat that's very important to say is that not all state legislatures, not all states follow all of these fair redistricting principles. And even if they have all of them, they don't necessarily, some of them have more priority than the others. So number one, we already spoke about population equality, which means that in one given state, congressional districts should have the same size, population size, as much as possible. Number two is contiguity. And while again, that looks like a big academic Sunday word, what that really means is that you can go from one end of the district to the other without going through any other district. And we're going to show some examples of what this means when I show you some congressional district maps in the next slide. Other principles are the preservation of political boundaries and the preservation of communities of interest. And what this means is that people that draw maps should try their hardest not to divide, for example, a county in half or a city in half or a community in half. So if you're in New York, for example, what this means is that you want to try to keep Washington Heights as intact and possible within one district. If you're in Florida, we might be talking about Hialeah or about some neighborhoods in Kissimmee. So think about those communities of interest that we have in every state. And what this means is that we're going to try to have them in one district as much as possible without dividing and diluting their power. Other two important things are fair and effective representation or competitiveness, which is basically not having one party or one group be a super majority in the district. And then the other principle is compactness, which is, and again, this is something that's more visual, but basically to try as much as possible that from one corner of the district to the center and from the other corner to the district, it's kind of like the same distance as much as possible. So think of shapes like a circle, like a square, like a rectangle. Those are the type of shapes that we want to do when drawing districts. So let's see some examples. If you see here, we have two congressional districts. On the left-hand side, you have the congressional district of Representative Chuy Garcia in Illinois, which is a really famous example of a district that was actually done to not dilute minority voting strength. If you see here on the north side and on the south side there of the district, there are a lot of communities that have traditionally not been represented in Congress. So this is a way for those communities to have the power to elect someone to represent it. But the reason that I wanted to use this map is because we wanted to talk about contiguity. So if you see here, you can actually go from the north side of the district all the way here through this street and connect through all the district without having to go through another district to do that. So that's really what contiguity means. And then on the other side, we are seeing the representative district in Florida of Congresswoman Val Demings. And I use this shape so that we could also see what I'm talking about when I say compactness, right? This is as mostly a square or rectangle shape as possible. And it's also inside all of the Orange County. So in that way, they're preserving the political subdivision. Now, we had also mentioned that there are ways that stakeholders can actually design districts that dilute the power of minorities, of communities of interest, or of certain groups. So these tactics are called gerrymandering. And they're literally the process of designing districts that unfairly, and that's very important, that unfairly favor one group over another. And if you're asking yourself gerrymandering, that's kind of like a very specific term. It's because it actually came to be um, in the 1700s when Governor Elbridge Gerry of Massachusetts signed what I believe, or what people believe, is one of the first redistricting bills that definitely favored one group over another. And in this case, it was the Democratic Republican Party. And the reason why they ended up calling it gerrymandering, it's because someone said that the district was shaped like a salamander. So if you see here on this slide, this is the actual design that came out and was published in the newspaper all the way back then that created the word gerrymandered. So this is actually, this word came out of a political satire against a governor of Massachusetts. But let's talk a little bit about what it actually means and how it's put in practice. So two of the gerrymandering tactics that are most used are called packing and cracking. And they might seem the same, but they're really different tactics that are used for the same purpose. So when we're talking about packing, we're basically consolidating or packing minority populations into districts. Now, normally in practice, what ends up happening is that you basically the party in charge, or the people that want to favor one group over the other, what they do is that they sacrifice technically one seat. They give it to that group that they don't want having more seats by packing the most that they can into that district. And then they make surrounding areas more competitive. And again, we're going to show a couple of examples about this. Then we also have cracking, which is the practice of dividing a community into several districts with the intention of diluting voting power and preventing that community from gaining the representation that they would have if it were at a proportional level. So let's talk, or let's see some of those examples. As you can see here, this is an example of packing. On the left-hand side, you have districts that are divided proportionally. So if you see on the left-hand side, you have two districts where the green dots are the majority, and then district number 3, where there's the same amount of both green and orange dots. So if one party wanted to unfairly give an advantage to the orange dots, or the orange party in this case, what they can do, as you see here on the right hand side, is that they pack as many people as they can in one district, thus sacrificing that district, but then they gain two districts. While in a proportional division, or in a proportional representation, they would actually, the orange group would only be able to be competitive in one district. So again, as you can see, they packed most people in one district. So the green dots there are the majority, but then they're the minority in both District 1 and 2. The other example that we spoke about is cracking. So in this case, we changed the distribution a little bit, but still in proportion, you can see that the green dots would have District 1 and 3. If every single green dot voted for their representative, they would have the majority. And then in District 2, they would be competitive. See, it would be like 55 versus 5.5 versus 4.5. So when you do a cracking technique, what you end up doing is, again, you distribute the green dots in a way that instead of having two majority districts, now they only have one minority district. So those are some of the ways that bad faith actors, or people that are acting in bad faith, use to not only divide our communities, but also dilute our representative power. So we spoke about all of those things, but now let's really talk about the process. Again, like I mentioned, every state has a different process and a different timeline. And this is very important that we know, and that we take heed of this, because just because you hear or see news that something happened one way in, let's say, North Carolina or Florida or California, doesn't mean that's going to happen in your state. Because again, every state has a different process, a different timeline, and also there's differences between who controls the process and how much power they have. For example, in 33 of the in 33 of the states, it's state legislatures who control most of the redistricting process. And that includes drawing the maps, putting them up for a vote, with the exception that in most of those states, the governors can veto their redistricting maps. However, and again, this is just to highlight how different each state process is, Connecticut and North Carolina don't give the power to the governor to be able to veto redistricting legislation. Then other states, it's not the state legislature who controls the redistricting process, it's redistricting commissions who draw the congressional maps. And again, just like the redistricting processes and timelines vary by state, the composition, power, responsibilities of all those redistricting commissions also vary by state. In some states, they only serve as an advisory capacity. In some states, like New York, it's an independent redistricting commission that has the opportunities to draft the first two rounds of the map. We also have other times where other states where commissions act as a backup commission in case that the state legislature can't approve maps. So that's why it's very important that depending on the state that you live, you access the information so you can find out exactly what that process is. And if you want to learn more information specifically about how your state handles a redistricting process, please feel free to go to the resources tab in our website, redistrictingacademy.org, because in there you'll have links that will take you to either the commissions or the state legislature committees that are in charge of the redistricting process in your state. Finally, and we spoke about this a little bit earlier, there are no shared criteria among states for drawing congressional districts. And the reason I say this is because there have been times in the history of this country where Congress has legislated and has passed federal laws that determine and guide the redistricting process by implementing or asking that certain fair redistricting principles be followed. So that is not the case right now. But as we're going to talk in a few minutes, one of the ways that you can take action about the redistricting process is requesting that Congress pass these shared criteria so that this redistricting process can be a little bit more standardized across the nation and can also help protect minorities for having their powers and their opportunities to be represented diluted. Now, just like I mentioned, every state has a different process and every state has different decision makers. But let's go through some of the people or some of the stakeholders that you can engage with for the redistricting process. So first of all, we have the state legislatures. Like I mentioned, in 33 states, it's the state legislature that completely controls the process. And in other states that have commissions, like the case of New York, the state legislature still has the power of approval of these redistricting maps. So state legislatures, especially the ones that are on the redistricting committee in your state, are a great stakeholder to reach out to when you have concerns about redistricting. Like I mentioned, in other states, not the case in North Carolina or Connecticut, the governor is also a good stakeholder to reach out to because he or she could potentially veto redistricting legislation in the future. I also mentioned the redistricting commissions, which in some states they substitute the state legislatures, in some states they complement them, but they are still a stakeholder and a important group of decision makers that we need to go talk to. And then the other thing is that a lot of these maps end up in court. A lot of the maps that are drawn are challenged and end up in court. So it's also upon us. We also have the venue of going over to the judicial branch and trying to solve our issues with the maps that have been drawn that way. So we spoke all about the redistricting process, how reapportionment and census are intertwined, why it's important for us, right? That these districts are created for the next 10 years, and they basically have the power to either help us expand our representation or lock us out of power. So this means also that you need to get involved. And you already did the first step. The first step is taking courses like this, watching videos like this, finding resources like this to get informed about the redistricting process. We know that sometimes redistricting can be seen as something boring or technical or academic. So we're hoping to make it a little bit more bright, more engaging, more sexy, right? But at the end of the day, we still need you to get involved in this process. And there are a couple ways that you can do it. Number one, like I mentioned in the previous slide, is engaging with stakeholders, right? A lot of these people are elected officials or respond to the pressures of their constituents. So that's something that we need to use in our favor, letting them know that we're paying attention, that this matters to us, and that we need elected officials that are going to be listening to us in all things, including redistricting. You can also provide testimony. And again, if you go to the Take Action tab in our website, you're going to be able to see the links that will take you to the different committees that are working on redistricting so that you can see when or if they're asking for testimony so you can go and provide some input. You can also sign or create online petitions. If you go to Google right now and search redistricting petition and you put your state, I'm sure you will find a couple of options of petitions that you can sign. You can also join other groups, other coalitions that are working on this amazing type of work. There are a lot of organizations, both national, state, and hyper local, that are working on redistricting. And we have a lot of them in our resources website, but you can also search online for some of those groups. Additionally, you can inform your neighbors and friends. At the end of the day, that's what gives us power, right? That's why we're so proud and so happy to be doing this academy, because at the end of the day, an informed public will always be best for everyone involved. When informed voters and informed citizens make decisions and go out and create change, that's when things change for the better. So it's important that after watching this video, you let your friends, your neighbors, your coworkers know that this resource exists, both in English and Spanish, for them to learn more about this process. And finally, this wouldn't be an academy if we didn't give you homework or we didn't give you an assignment, la asignación. So go down in the page that you're watching this video, you're going to see a little button that says homework. If you click there, you're going to get some forms that you can basically fill out and email us at ouracademy@hispanicfederation.org or upload at the Take Action Homework Network. Everyone that completes their homework will get a certification for the academy. So we're hoping that everyone can basically do the homework so you can learn and apply everything that you learn here. I personally want to thank you for being here with us and for spending your time learning about the redistricting process, but most importantly, about what you can do. We're hopeful that this information was helpful, and I want to motivate you to watch all the other videos that we have from coalition building, advocacy campaigns, and even some of the state redistricting processes that we have been breaking down in our videos. So thank you so much and have a great day.